What is up, you heathens and demons, sinners and saints? Beautiful, blasphemous bastards. Welcome back to Knock TV. Yeah, I had to take a few days off. I wasn't planning on taking a few days off, but, you know, Grandma always said if you don't have nothing nice to say, then don't say nothing at all. And while I usually don't follow that rule, I think, you know, taking a couple steps back and reflecting, thinking, considering. Yeah, I know. The fucking NFL is on. What's up, Kent Hovind, CPA? You know, my Lions don't play today, so the NFL isn't on. Yeah, it's, you know, I wasn't actually going to stream today. I was going to take one more day and stream tomorrow. But this one guy, whatever his fucking name is, pissed me off, called me a coward. You know, because, you know, they seem so up in arms that liberals and lefties are, you know, being all emotional, although we're not the ones being emotional. I mean, I guess we are. I mean, when they tell you that your political ideology is pretty much going to be outlawed, you tend to get a little emotional. But, you know, just really reflecting, stepping back, looking, observing, what am I seeing? I see a Republican Party hell-bent on sticking to a narrative, not caring about the facts of the murder of somebody that was supposed to be an icon to them, a friend to some of them, saying that we're the ones disrespecting Charlie Kirk by remembering who he really was, as they whitewash his memory and try to pretend like he was the saint of all good in defiance of all that was evil. But really, when it comes to their ideology, he was. And I think that's what I want to talk about today. Heather Richardson Cox, or Heather Cox Richardson, getting those mixed up, has been kind of the last few weeks doing, you know, the media tour, the going on mainstream media, going on podcasts. And she's a historian that I've always appreciated because, you know, she comes from the right. She's a true historical conservative, what's known as a Lincoln conservative. Talking about the conservative movement, the history of the conservative movement in America. And I think that it really helps, and me, like, you know, diving deep into Heather's work has really helped me contextualize what's going on at the moment. Because, you know, it's easy to think that this is outrageous, that this isn't American, this isn't America. But really, it is. It is America. It is American. And it always has been. It is nothing new. It is just the escalation of the old. And if you've been in politics for, you know, as long, and not in I've dabbled in politics, but, you know, if you've been active in politics, if you've been covering this politics as long as I have been, you know, you've known for a really long time that conservatives were bad faith actors, that they didn't really stand on principle. Like, we knew back when they were, you know, slinging all of that false outrage about cancel culture, as they were doing their own cancel culture at the time. You know, for every racist or neo-Nazi that we got fired, they got some average Joe fired um, for whatever, or they went on some ad campaign, like Bud Light, all of a sudden they hated Bud Light because of a trans campaign, or all of a sudden they hated Keurig machines, or all of a sudden they couldn't make up their minds that they hated Harley Davidson because Harley went woke, but it's Harley Davidson. It's like one of the staples of our, white boy redneck image, which really does a disservice to a really great motorcycle. I've never ridden one, but they're extremely well made. Should be for everybody, but and they are kind of. So, I did the thing that, conservatives say we don't do. Step back. All right, let's check my outrage. Let's get a handle on my outrage. And this one guy calls me a coward. Wait, I thought that's what you wanted us to do. No, you don't want us to do. You don't really want to. You want us to be outraged because it fits your narrative. Like when we get outraged, we are doing exactly what they want us to do. And that's not something that I would have seen probably back in my drunken days. But it's something that even, as I was outraged, I picked up on and I tried to dampen. In fact, most of the people I've been watching since Charlie Kirk died has been right-leaning people. Most of them. Most of the conspiracies when it comes to Charlie Kirk's death comes from right-leaning people. Conservatives will try to say the Groypers is this left-wing conspiracy, but it's not. It's all part of the right-wing conspiracy. Or I won't even call it right-wing conspiracy. More like the prepper wing conspiracy of the right. That it was Israel, and that Israel was trying to point the finger at the Groypers, which I still think is a possibility. Don't want to have a serious conversation about the ideology of this young man, Tyler Robinson, who, if he did shoot Charlie Kirk, then I was clearly wrong, because I thought more, statistical odds speaking, and now they're trying to whitewash, the history of political violence in America, but historically speaking, if one of these acts, no matter what party it's against, it's going to be a right-wing assailant or plot. Historically speaking, you really need to go back to the 70s and 60s, maybe the 80s. Maybe I'd have to look at the 80s, but definitely you could find some left-wing violence dominating your headlines in the 60s and 70s probably. And you still have it. I'm not one. I like to always point that out. It still happens, right? We still do anywhere, depending on what study you're actually looking at. They vary. Anywhere from 4 to 10% of political violence done in this country is done by left-wing advocates, left-wing groups. It does happen. Just not as much as extremist Islamic people and groups, or the extreme far right. Now, and that's been a conflagration that has summed up to the last few years, where the Republican Party went further and farther right and is now pretty much extreme far right. I think you could have an argument about how extreme far right the current Republican Party is, but again, this is nothing new. And actually, it's easy to sit here and say it's a slide because we've grown up. If you're Generation X, you grew up and you've seen this this great progression kind of to the left when it came to society, right? More and more people got more and more rights. More and more people were more and more accepted since I've been alive. So it's easy to say, while that there's been this massive shift to the right when we saw society progressing. But in honesty, like if you really look at history, if you really look at the history of the conservative party, and Republicans hate when you talk about the party switch, and it's not really so much a party switch, but a party consolidation. That's, as always, kind of left-wing terminology, or terminology. I won't even call it left-wing terminology. Terminology kind of rocks the boat, right? Like the Big Bang Theory, unfortunate name. Global warming, unfortunate name, So, and that's kind of what I want to look at today. Is this is nothing new. The only thing new is half the population is emboldened to pretty much, what's the word I'm looking for? Give voice. I can't think of the word. Give voice to what they used to only think. So I'm going to look at two different things from Heather Cox Richardson, two different interviews she did. One is going to be shorter. I probably won't watch all of it. It's like this part of an interview she did that the person that put it on their channel did some weird stuff with it. Like, it doesn't show the interview for most of it. But what she says in this, I wish I could find the actual interview, because this really, I think, will open your eyes. And to where I've always kind of studied the conservative movement. It ranges back to when I considered myself a conservative. I've always kind of been hip to where the conservative movement came from. Lincoln, who was probably the first person to ever call himself a conservative, to where it is now. You get caught up in the moment and you forget all of this shit. But what you don't forget, and something that I've espoused, is Donald Trump is not the cause. None of this is Donald Trump's fault. Like, sure, he's at fault for the actions that he's taking, but he's just a symptom of a sickness that has infested this country since pretty much the Civil War, and you could probably argue even before the Civil War. And that's what we're going to break down today. So let's get into it. How are y'all doing? Smokey Sane is here. This one guy. Yeah, you're fucking retarded, dude. You're just fucking retarded. Sophia, which is midnight. Kent Hovind CPA. Robin Webster. Spooky. Let's get into it. If you're not familiar with Heather Cox Richardson, of course, like today's MAGA would consider her like a rhino, but I think even today we'll get the history of where rhino comes from, right? But what she is a historian, and she's a true conservative by the philosophy behind conservatism. And I think that you would probably find a lot of people like her in the Democratic Party, right? Like I sit here and say the Democratic Party center-right. Democratic Party is probably more conservative in philosophy and political philosophy, the political philosophy of conservatism, than the people calling themselves conservatives today. And that's fascinating if you actually know the history. And it will give you context. It will give you ammunition, that metaphorical ammunition to combat the verbal warfare that is going on right now. And right now, so far, at least, it's pretty much verbal warfare. Now, Jimmy Kimmel, Colbert, they would disagree with this. Probably Destiny, who was recently deplatformed for his or demonetized for his Piers Morgan appearance, would probably disagree. But so far, it's been a war of words. Now, we know Trump wants to make it more than that, and we know that because, like, dumbass accidentally posted a text message to Pam Bondi on his True Social because he's losing his fucking mind. He's far more gone than Joe Biden ever was mentally. Like, this dude is like end of life dementia, right? And then, you know, once he dies naturally, they'll blame that on us too. I'm calling it now. Call me a prophet. When he dies of natural causes, it's the left's fault. Predicting it now. But let's get into this.
Conservatism really comes around after the New Deal. And you have business interests who would like to roll back the New Deal. They link up with segregationists who want to try to insulate the South from integrating African Americans. And then eventually religious forces who are uneasy about the changing role of women.
Well, they actually...
Now, if I wanted to take the time, I probably could have actually found this because the guy sounds like one of the people from the Bulwark. Now, I do, unlike a lot of far lefties, listen to a wide variety of politics. A wide variety. I still listen to people on the right. I still listen to people like Candace Owens, Ben Shapiro. I was listening to Charlie Kirk. Even Nick Fuentes on occasion. I like to know the mind of my enemy. I don't listen to him like I used to. Every time I got in the car, it would be talk radio. I don't pay attention to him like I used to. But, you know, I'm not one that gatekeeps my far leftism, right? Like, I'm not going to, like, stop watching Pac-Man because he's a liberal, pro-Israel guy that takes dark money from Democratic groups. I personally feel like we need to stop doing that bullshit if we want to defeat this conservative movement, because we're going to have to defeat it. It's not politics anymore. We're going to have to defeat it because they are literally trying to outlaw us. It's not the first time this country has made a certain people illegal. And I'm not talking about us lefties yet. I'm talking about trans people. So I don't think that they've actually signed that order yet. So we're still in the war of words. But that order's coming. And the fight really begins. You know, like, they want to blame the left for all the political rhetoric leading to violence, but the president is literally making the country unsafe by demonizing his political opponents, backing his political opponents into a corner. What do you think is going to happen? You think the violence is going to cease? Do you think we're going to just let you come arrest us? Let you kill us? We are not going to do that. What he's doing is dangerous. And you're so quick to point at us, which just shows your utter fucking hypocrisy. It makes you a joke. But you don't care about being a joke. You only care about winning. And honestly, Democrats can learn some of that shit. But let's get into this.
1937 is when we get the Conservative Manifesto. And I do want to just start by distinguishing, as you did, but a little bit more firmly, between the concept of political conservatism, which is a really interesting and a really important concept, and the rise of this radical group that calls itself conservative. And those are not at all the same thing. From the very beginning, they are not conservative. They're using the name conservative. And that actually really matters. And the other piece to...
So note what she said there. They're not really conservative. They're using the name conservative. Do you want to know what they really are? Dixiecrats. They're the remnants of the segregationists and their ideology, passed down generation to generation and now spread all across the country. You know, I often talked about, you know, how I moved away from the South to escape the Confederates. But then shortly after moving to the North, it seemed like more and more Confederates were here. More and more rebel flags. More and more people talking about white heritage. and I've talked about it openly on this channel, like the Confederacy has spread to the liberal North. See, like Republicans that tell you there was never a party switch, and again, it wasn't a party switch, it was a party consolidation, a consolidation of ideologies to two parties instead of an influx of ideologies in both parties. The liberal North used to be the Republicans. The conservative South used to be the Democrats. Although there was both in both parties. The Dixiecrats, the segregationists, the Strom Thurmonds, are what modern Republicans are. It's what they are. It's the ideology they have passed down to their children and to their children's children, and it's how we have gotten to where we are today. It's why they don't care about the America we know. The America that has gotten closer and closer to those original ideals that the forefathers, though they had them, were too cowardly to implement them. They don't care about that America. They care about the America what year was it? 1862? You know, that's the America they care about. And most of them still to this day won't tell you that, but it should be coming more and more obvious to you. Like Black MAGA. They don't have a place for you in their America. They don't. You'll be arrested with the rest of us if arresting is what it is. You know, Stephen Miller has recently come out and said, or he maybe it was a while ago, quoted it as, you know, he'd like to see America get down to a population of about 100 million. That's minus about 285 to 290 million people where we are today. That's not 285 million immigrants they want to get rid of. Or he wants to get rid of.
That I do think is important is that while religious traditionalism doesn't really start to dominate, and now we're talking partisanship, the Republican Party until the 1960s. It's part of the coalition from the beginning, and it's worth remembering that in 1937, the Scopes trial was only, 12 years old? No, I can't do the math. 15 years old. Here we go. 1925 to 1937 is
12 years.
There you go. 12 years apart. So that matters. I mean, we tend to focus on the race in those early years, but the gender piece, which is going to come to the fore through the religious right, is going to be what we're dealing with now.
And by the time we get to Goldwater, that's when it is sort of, that becomes known as movement conservatism.
It's actually not named. It's not named movement conservatism until I think it's 1974, and I think it was journalist Sidney Blumenthal who gave it that name.
All right, so here we're going to get into, you know, the crux of where we are. Conservatism and movement conservatism. You know, I wonder how many people that call themselves conservatives today actually know they're not conservatives. Probably not very many of them. Why? Because they've been lied to their entire life about even what their own political ideology is. It's why they honestly think they're not racist people. A lot of them, like a lot of people in my family, like seriously think they're not racist people. It's just because, you know, to them it's not racist. And it wasn't put to them in racist terms. It was put to them from pulpits. You know, it was put to them from, you know, people that had a wide variety of friends. But it's an ideology that has been able to stick around since, you know, our supposed victory in the Civil War.
However, I could be wrong on that, but however, they certainly grabbed hold of that name with the idea that it was a political movement that was named conservatism. So they were movement conservatives. That's a political faction, as opposed to, as you say, the political ideology of conservatism, which is fascinating.
So, talk to me a little bit about the difference between conservatism as it exists as a political philosophy, which is like Edmund Burke, right? And then how it exists as a, like, I guess, you know, in vivo versus in situ, right? in America, and how those things have diverged. Let's just start post New Deal.
You want me to start post New Deal or start?
Sure,
with Burke?
Let's start post New Deal.
Okay.
Unless you want to start with Burke.
Well, I think the concept of what conservatism means is really important in this era when so many people see it as being what is currently the radical right. Because today's radical right is trying to destroy the government. That is not a conservative position. That's not an ideologically conservative position. Edmund Burke is a really interesting character because if you think about the time he's writing, which is during the French Revolution, the general sense in the sort of the United States, early republic still, but in the UK and in that political tradition is that government is a negative force, that government can only hurt things. And so you really want to make sure you hold it back and that it can't really do very much. Well, Burke takes a look at what's happening in France during the French Revolution, where people are asserting an ideology. And in order to make that ideology become real, they're actually killing people and, you know, setting buildings on fire and doing things that are destroying the stability of the country and killing people.
Yeah, one of these days I really want to take a look at the French Revolution because it was wild. It was wild. I've in my hiatus from YouTube, when I was getting used to being sober, one of the things I watched was like History Tube, a lot of historians reacting to like French Revolution, Civil War, American Revolution, just major wars, World War II, World War I. A lot of history, especially in the first 6 months after I stopped drinking and stopped doing YouTube. So a lot of history, and I still watch them every once in a while. I don't know, like one of my favorite History Tube. I think they call it History Tube. People, I think his name is like Professor Harry or something. I can't remember his name. But I watch him all the time, and he's showing himself more and more to be kind of like a Trumper, and I'm like, oh, God, I really liked you. Mr. Terry. Mr. Terry is his name. But he's pretty good. He's pretty good. He's like a school teacher. So, yeah, it's fascinating, and I do plan on looking at the French Revolution. It's really where Napoleon made a name for himself. But a lot of ideals that we're familiar with today was born there, and she's exactly right. It was born in blood. It was wild what was going on in the French Revolution. And, that's where you get the terminology, break out the guillotines, like it was fucking wild.
So he begins to argue that, in fact, the government should not rest on ideological principles because pretty soon you're trying to make the people fit the ideology rather than the ideology fit the people. And that what a government really should do is it should promote stability. And the way in his era... I'm
going to turn off my camera and try to fix my monitor because I've got like a short in one of my cords, and it's glitching. It's not coming through on the stream, but it's bothering me, so I'll be right back.
One promoted stability.
Or I actually might be gone for a while, because I'm actually smoking flower today, because I got a free bag with a coupon, so I might smoke a joint.
Was to promote the protection of property and the church and aristocracy and all those, and the family, all those pieces of a society that promote stability and give people a stake in the country. That's really the first major philosophy that talks about the use of the government in a positive way rather than in a negative way. And that idea of conserving the pieces that are important and then moving forward based not on an ideology, but on what works and what doesn't, which is what he talks about, is a really important concept for understanding how a government should or should not work. In the United States, it doesn't get much traction because they ain't got much to conserve at that point. They're brand new.
Right.
And the United States doesn't start to use the term conservatism until after the Compromise of 1850. And part of the Compromise of 1850 says that northern states have to, regardless of their own state laws, have to return fugitive enslaved people to the American South. And the law is written in such a way that free Black people have like no rights at all. And a lot of people in the North who disagree either with the idea of enslavement or with the idea that the federal government should override their own laws start to say, no, we're not going to pay any attention to that part of the Compromise of 1850, to the Fugitive Slave Act. When that happens, Southern enslavers start to refer to those people, saying they're not going to pay attention to that law, as radicals. As they're not going to pay attention to law, they are radicals. The abolitionists begin to say, no, wait a minute, we're not radicals, we're conservatives because we are standing on the Declaration of
Actually, I mean, fascists like, I'm calling you Confederates.
Independence. And that's the term that Abraham Lincoln picks up when he starts to call himself a conservative, as he does very dramatically at Cooper Union in New York. When he said,
I mean, y'all are literally calling us terrorists, so I don't really care, Jill.
You're the radicals, we're the conservatives. What he is saying is we are standing on the principles of the Declaration of Independence. And it's on those terms that the concept of conservatism comes to the United States. And you often hear me saying that I am a Lincoln conservative, and that's what I'm talking about. I believe in the Declaration of Independence.
So how does it then morph into what happens after the New Deal?
So again, I think it's important to remember that the people who become movement conservatives are out of step with mainstream Democrats, of course, but mainstream Republicans as well, who would define themselves as conservatives. Somebody like Dwight Eisenhower, who is looking at the fact that a number of the aspects of the New Deal worked really well. There'd been this terrible depression, and now they figured out how to regulate business and provide a basic social safety net and significant enough wages for workers that probably wasn't going to happen again. And they figured out how to, promote education and how to create a rising standard of living and how to protect civil rights, although they're just getting their toes wet in that. And they're trying to figure out how to have a rules-based international order so that will protect society and so on. That's Eisenhower as well as somebody like FDR or Harry Truman. The movement conservatives want to get rid of that. They want to go back to the period before that, into the 1920s. And they're very clear about that in that they first articulate that stand in the Conservative Manifesto of 1937, in which they say the government has no right to regulate business. It has no right to have a basic social safety net that belongs to the churches. It better stay out of civil rights, and it shouldn't promote infrastructure. So they've got this idea. And when, in fact, somebody like William F. Buckley Jr. publishes God and Man at Yale in 1951, the reviews of...
Oh, yeah. I agree, Puff. I agree wholeheartedly. And one of the facts about, like, especially Nazi Germany and their fascism was they pulled a lot of their shit from what America did. They took a lot of examples from America. So yeah, I don't disagree with that at all.
That are just brutal. And they say one guy literally calls him an enfant terrible, this upstart who's trying to change.
So, and that's the thing. So, and I'm grinding my weed, and I think I fixed my monitor. That's the thing, that the modern conservatives have made a deal with the devil, because modern conservatives, what she's describing to you as movement conservatism, and essentially what that is was back in the day. So getting rid of a social safety net was never a conservative thing, right? It's not a conservative thing. Conservatism is keeping what works and getting rid of what doesn't. That's conservatism. When it comes to a political philosophy, that is conservatism. What movement conservatism is all the segregationists, all the Dixiecrats. Jill, you're a Dixiecrat. That's what I'm calling you. They just wanted to bitch and moan and have all their old gripes. And as you're going to see as we go through this today, they've been calling it socialism forever. Like pretty much since socialism first started showing its socialist head. Right? Forever. Like, this is not nothing new to the modern era, or even the era that I grew up in, Generation X, because we've heard it my entire life. Democrats are a bunch of socialists, Marxists, communists. Trump calls them everything. Trump calls them they're Marxist, fascist, communist, socialist. We've heard it, but they've been saying it forever. And conservatism was, having a successful country, having good capitalism that works for everybody. And if it works, you keep it. If it doesn't work, you get rid of it. Right? That's conservatism. And then the conservative movement comes along, and it's like just a bunch of people that have all their old gripes about, like if you give black people a vote, then they're just going to vote for people to redistribute wealth from the white man to the poor people. And if you give women the right to vote, then they're just going to vote for people that's going to redistribute wealth from the white man to poor people. This has been class warfare in this country since this thing has been a country. And one of these days, people will wake up to that. One of these days, they'll realize it's not the black man that's their enemy. It's not the woman that's their enemy. It's not the trans person that's their enemy, nor the immigrant. We're a country of immigrants. No, their enemy are the wealth hoarders. The true enemy of the American people, the true enemy of the American dream, are the wealth hoarders. That's it. And people are going to start waking up to that eventually. They can only make us hate each other for so long. I don't hate any of these MAGA people that have been fooled into their fascist ideology, because they were taught that since they were kids. I don't hate any of them. I feel sorry for them. And I'll continue to feel sorry for them, even as they beat me or arrest me or kill me. Yeah, I'm not saying I won't cry out in pain. I'm not saying I won't beg for mercy. But I'll feel sorry for them. Because eventually, if there is a God out there, all these motherfuckers are going to have to meet that motherfucker. And it almost makes an atheist wish he's wrong. Almost. Just so I could be up there eating popcorn. I'll be like, God, you know what? You can send me to hell. Just let me come up here and sit every time you judge these motherfuckers, to send them down there with me so I can eat some popcorn and watch. Because they're going to.
This stable society. And in that review, he says, this is not conservatism. This is anything but
Yeah, she put it really eloquently earlier, Puff, and she'll get into it more The next one we're going to watch is an extended interview she did on Pod Save America. This is pretty much the part that I wanted to watch, so we'll be done with this one soon. But she put that really well earlier, that, you know, conservatives were patriots. Conservatives loved the country and wanted to make the country work. The current so-called conservative movement wants to destroy the government. And they made a deal with the devil, and they welcomed the far-right white supremacist extremists into the fold. They're utilizing them and their Gestapo tactics. And they think that they're going to get their Christian nationalist state, their Christian nationalist ethno-state, to where their uber Christianity is going to rule. But they're kind of pussies. You know, the white supremacists, they've been fighting Antifa for decades. Antifa hardened them. So when everybody's done with us and they can start fighting amongst themselves about what kind of ethno-state they're going to have, my bet's on the white supremacists. My bet's on the people that have been fighting Antifa. My bet's on the people that have been actually doing the fighting. You know, it's my problem with the current Democratic Party and the liberals right now. Like, liberals want to throw lefties under the bus, right? But it's the lefties that are out in the streets activated. It's the lefties that are the activists in the streets doing the work. All right, my daughter's knocking, so we'll continue with this.
Conservatism. So that little faction that now is referred to as conservative, I by anybody but me, I mean, I won't call them that, is actually a radical attempt to get rid of the conservative government that Americans as a whole built after the New Deal.
So you said that the conservatism as it exists now exists to sort of, what did you say? Did you say destroy the government, wage war against the government?
I wish you'd stop using the word conservatism, because there are plenty of conservatives left in the United States. There's plenty of them, but they're not members of today's MAGA party.
Yeah, well, the MAGA party then, which we'll just use that. I would have agreed that 10 years ago, the pre-MAGA conservative, or whatever you want to call it, I mean, we can call it the Republican Party then, even though it's a little imprecise. What it existed was to sort of, in theory, it said it wanted a smaller government, but it didn't really. What it wanted was protect business interests and pursue, as you said, the other things, right? It was very uncomfortable with racial progress. It was very uncomfortable with the changing role of women in society. It had projects that it wanted. It seems to me that it's different in that it is now almost openly fascist and authoritarian. Is that fair? Like, it doesn't want smaller government. It doesn't want the government to change. It doesn't have policy goals. It wants domination. And it wants government to dominate all aspects of everybody's lives, and it wants to control government for forever.
That's right. That's right.
Is that unfair?
No, I think that is fair. And I think it's important to pull apart the partisan nature of what's going on and the concept of conservatism, which are just very different as well. And as I say, there's plenty of conservatives in the United States today who would like to promote the institutions of stability, recognizing that that's how you make sure you have a society that is not violent and where people can work and get ahead and have educations and stable marriages and healthy children and all those pieces of society that are good for a nation, any nation. But the people in charge of it now may have let's call them MAGAs, like you say. People might refer to them as conservatives. But in fact, what they are looking to do is to destroy American democracy. And we can talk about why. There's theories about why. They have articulated theories for why they don't like American democracy. But to replace that with an extraordinarily powerful government, which is very different than what the movement conservatives talked about. And that very powerful government they would like to have impose on the rest of us Christian nationalism, which is about as far from conservatism as you can get.
So I guess the big question is, and I've written about this a bunch.
All right. I mean, this conversation is fascinating. We can watch this one, but I want to get into the next one because she's going to really get into the historical context and the build up of the conservative movement in the next interview. Pod Save America is another liberal outlet that does really good content. I don't judge them because they're not left like me, or I'm not even sure what their stance on Israel is. I think that the stance on Israel is and should be a deal breaker. But it's a deal breaker in the sense that like we should fight about that, but they're still like if their politics is still, I mean, if politics are 85% your own, then I think you've got to accept those people. But then you've just got to like, they should be reachable unless they're just paid off by AIPAC. If it's a money thing, nobody's ever going to be reachable because money is truly what people care about. But if it's an ideological thing that they support Israel and they've always supported Israel, then when it comes to the genocide, it should be easy to turn them. And I think, most of your paid pundits that are going to be pro-Israel are just money sellouts. And most of your Democrats out in the world, most of your left-leaning people out in the world don't support Israel. So I think the ones that actually do probably do just because they always did and probably don't know much about the genocide. So I think most would turn against it. Now, when it comes to like punditry, it's like, yeah, you're a fucking sellout, but still, like, I'm not going to not watch a great interview just because, and I don't even know what their stance on Israel is. Hopefully they have the right one. But again, even as saying it that way, that's like thought policing. And it's something that, like, I've never tried to do. And it's something like, I don't know if Smokey's still in the chat, but like I remember having a fight with Smokey over his use of the N-word, because he wanted to be able to say the N-word. And I told him that, you can say it. You have the freedom to say it. It's no Democrats ever outlawed your ability to say a word. That's unconstitutional. My argument was it's just the social ramifications of you saying that word publicly, somebody's probably going to kick your ass if you're in the wrong situation. And that was my argument. And I stand true to that today. Like here recently, like I think it was like the night that Charlie Kirk was killed, maybe the day after. I think it was down in Florida. They were having this like vigil for Charlie Kirk, right? Like a bunch of fucking MAGAs out in public having a vigil for Charlie Kirk. And this person, I don't know, man, woman, I don't know what. I just remember the story. The person rolls through the vigil saying, "Fuck Charlie Kirk. Fuck Charlie Kirk." And what you imagine happened. They got that motherfucker off. He rode through the vigil on a moped. They ran that motherfucker down, got him off his moped, and beat the living shit out of that dude. And I didn't feel sympathy for that person. I didn't feel sympathy for that person at all. It's that fuck around and find out bullshit. Like, you have the freedom to do that, right? But you're going to fuck around and find out. Now, that's in that extreme situation, right? And I do believe in, like, social consequences for, like, really bad behavior. But it's got to be, like, really bad behavior. Like I don't want racists in an ambulance, because just too many conflicts of interest there, right? But I've never personally tried to cancel anybody. I've never gotten anybody fired from their job. But, like, I've argued for the justification of that in like really bad situations. Like if you're a neo-Nazi, you probably shouldn't be a doctor, and especially not like a heart surgeon, right? Because if one of those people you come, is on your surgery table and they're one of the people that you hate, well, there's a conflict of interest there, right? So maybe you stick to your Hippocratical oath, maybe not. But, I don't want to take that chance. But there is a vast difference between that and like this overreaction that we've had to the Charlie Kirk death, which is, people calling and getting people fired over quoting Charlie Kirk, or even like celebrating the man's death. That is something that people have always done. When JFK was assassinated, they pointed it out clearly, like superbly in the movie JFK, when he's assassinated and Kevin Costner's character, I think he's in a bar watching watching it on the TV, and some people are sad, some people are applauding, right? If you have a controversial public figure, when that public figure dies, whether naturally or unnaturally, you're going to get a lot of mixed reactions to that, right? And especially like if you've spent the last 15 years talking about snowflakes and, cancel culture, and now you're getting teachers fired because, I don't know, maybe they're a black woman teacher and they heard those comments about, lack of brain power. Maybe they had a reaction. I think that, in America, you're allowed to do that. There's a difference. We are not the same. You are being spiteful while we are literally like trying to make sure people aren't harmed. There's a big difference in that. Now, do the left take it overboard? Of course. The right takes it overboard? Of course. But like, it hasn't been really the left going around pointing fingers at people saying, snowflake, snowflake, snowflake. Like, it hasn't been the left doing that.
Was it always going to end like this, right? Was what arose out of the New Deal and became the movement conservatism in the 1970s with Goldwater and then sort of grew with Gingrich? Was it always going to wind up here at fascism? Or is that accident? I guess, were there other pathways? Are there other ways this story could have developed?
So, listen, I should start by saying I don't believe in inevitability. I believe that the sun comes up the next day and you can always change things. And if you remember, I wrote The History of the Republican Party in 2014. And in that, it was really sort of a warning to the Republican Party saying, hey, take the off-ramp. Take the off-ramp, guys, because it's time and past time. And there's still time for you to get back the popular party that supported the nation and all that. And I got lambasted for that I was way too hard on the Republican Party. And so I said to someone the other day, I sit here now awaiting my lavish apology from all those people who wrote that thing. But so the cosmic answer is no, nothing is inevitable. But, I got thinking about that after you wrote and asked me about that. And I do think that the collapse of the Soviet Union was a really important moment for that movement in the United States.
Now, I remind you, if the other person is indeed one of the co-hosts of The Bulwark, then both of these people are right-leaning people. Both of them. Heather Richardson considers herself a Lincoln conservative, and all of the people on The Bulwark are former Republican political strategists. They're people that actually used to help Republicans win elections, but are now no longer welcome in the modern conservative party because they are your normal, like they are conservatives by the political philosophy term, right? Social conservatives, Lincoln conservatives. They're no longer welcome in the modern Republican Party because of Trump, because of the complete takeover of the movement conservatives, which is just, basically generational outrage.
States. And by the way, I've had this argument with somebody who 100% disagrees with me, and that's a legitimate position as well. We could argue about that. By the way, I love to argue fact-based argument.
JVO, thank you. I
which
couldn't
is
remember his
different
name.
than sort of pot shots, which is where we seem to be right now. Because you learn new stuff all the time and often refine where you thought you were. But I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, if you think about Watergate and the fact that Republican senators during Watergate went to Nixon, led by, of all people, Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater, and said, and I paraphrase, dude, the gig is up. You need to resign because we're going to find you guilty. That's 74. And now look at us, where the Republican Party kept in power somebody that in 2019/2020, the Republican senators, according to Ted Cruz anyway, all believed he was guilty, but kept Trump in office because they were looking forward to the 2020 presidential election. What happened in there? And I am starting to think that the collapse of the Soviet Union made a really big difference because it seemed to a number of Americans to have proved that democracy was going to triumph forever. And, remember we got the end of history books and all that. Because everybody was going to become a liberal democracy. And they divorced the...
All right, I kind of watched more than I said I would. And I'm almost done, and I'll have my camera back on. We're going to go to this next one. This is, like I said, a prolonged... Now, Pod Save America is going to do their ads. We're going to try to skip across those. But this was a really good conversation to where she actually goes... and I probably should have found the one on the Bulwark because I'm sure she would have went into a lot of these areas in that conversation as well. But I listened to this conversation at work today, decided, I think this is the direction that I'm really going to kind of lean. I'm to try to at least get myself away from the outrage of it all, is to really, because it's what I like to do. I love history. I consider myself like an amateur history buff. That's never really came through because I was drunk all the time, so I wasn't actually studying or reading history. But it is become a passion that I picked up. I'm really I'm usually going to bed to histories of the Roman Empire or the Persian Empire or whatever empire. Like I'm constantly listening to and I'm reading again too, but mainly what I'm reading is like fantasy novels. I'm absorbing fantasy novels again. So I'm exercising my brain muscle. I think my brain is getting better. But my health continues to be like an issue. My legs are fucked.
You're a historian. You're going about, how did you find yourself being such an important media person where you write this Substack where you're interviewing presidents, former presidents? How did you make the leap from historian, professor to Substacker?
I'm laughing a little bit because when you call it a journey, it sounds like there was a plan involved, and there certainly was not. Listen, I'm a historian, and what I really am interested in as a human being is what creates change. That's what historians study, is how societies either adapt to change, create change, or reject it. And that's what I'm really interested in. And that's really all I do. And in order to understand those things as a historian, you need to be able to take a really clear look at what is happening. And so I'm very good at research, at figuring out what just happened. What are the rules by which things just happen?
All right, and the conclusion that I've come to, and why I canceled my open room, supposed to be Friday. I did have a doctor's appointment that I was able to get into Friday. But then I just started thinking about, do I want to have a conversation to where the person I'm talking to is just lying the whole time? Are those conversations worth anything? I'd rather have a conversation with a person like Heather Cox Richardson or a Lincoln conservative than these fake ass people that are still half mask on, half mask off, right? And they're just itching for the day that they can take the last half of the mask off. I'm tired of talking to those people. Bad faith actors. I literally, I don't care who you are. If we're friends, if you're not talking honestly about what the fuck is going on, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to participate and your thought policing. I don't want to participate. I'm in any of that. I don't want to give breath to it, because I mean, how many breaths do we have of truth left? Not many. And I want to spend my time breathing those breaths instead of wasting half of it listening to complete and utter bullshit that the person talking it doesn't even believe. I'm done with that shit.
Happened? Where were the rules broken? How did this change society? And that's really all I do and all I have ever done in front of a classroom, when I write a book, when I write the Letters from an American, when I interview people, is to try and see how they think, to see how they are changing society, because that's what I'm really interested in, is the way ideas change society. So the transition, I don't think there ever really has been a transition. I still do what I have always done. I'm just doing it with a lot more people now.
Did you have any idea when in the early days, how quickly you were growing? I mean, I don't know if you were checking the Substack charts or you had any sense of how many people were reading, but you very quickly became the most prolific, most popular Substacker in the world, huge audience. I'm sure you didn't intend that when you started, but when did you sort of figure out how big an audience you had?
I didn't start on Substack, remember.
Yeah.
I started on Facebook, where I had been for a long time. And what happened was almost exactly 6 years ago, I had been writing an essay about once a week or so, and I hadn't written since July 18th. And on September 15th of 2019, I was actually stung by a yellow jacket, and I'm allergic and didn't have my EpiPen. So while I was sort of waiting to see how bad my reaction would be, I sat down and figured I might as well write to my people on Facebook who are nervous about the fact they haven't heard from me. I'd heard from a number of them through Messenger, and I had about 22,000 followers there. So I wrote and just sort of said, here's what the United States looks like to me right now. And there was just this overwhelming response of people asking questions and following me and sharing things. And I actually had gone viral twice before writing from that page and had really pretty much let it drop. But in that case, I wrote to answer their questions. And it was...
All right. I think I'm going to skip past like this first initial part, because it's pretty much just her background, but you pretty much get it. Like if you're watching on the playback, or if you're Confederate in the side chat right now, then you probably don't know who she is, although you should. She basically wrote the history of your movement. Historian, scholar, Lincoln conservative, Heather Cox Richardson.
Very clear within about 2 to 3 weeks when my following numbers, and this is not scientific, this is just sort of how I'm remembering it.
We'll go here.
The takeover of our government by a few very wealthy people world.
Go back a little bit.
And that difference in this moment is one that has made what I do and people like me do, I think, have a huge following and a very important following. There is really terrific stuff going on right now in independent media, in smaller media, that looks to me like a media revolution that mirrors that of the 1850s, for example, when we get the rise of a newspaper like the New York Times, or the 1890s when we get the rise of things like McClure's Magazine, which ended up being instrumental in pushing back against the takeover of our government by a few very wealthy people, and instead reforming American democracy.
I take it that gives you some optimism about media in America, this sort of rise.
Like what she just dropped there, right? Like, you think this is the first time rich people have tried to take over the country? It's not. They've almost done it before. They're on the verge of doing it. I mean, that's without a doubt. I mean, they failed in the blatant attempt and have slowly corroded government to rely on them. But now we see the blatant attempt again, and they're almost there. They've got they've got a half a country of people who has generational outrage because we never dealt with the problem. We never dealt with the problem. We killed each other until the North eventually won, because the North had, more industry. They had more people. They had, and back then, it was divided along actual lines, right? You could. I'm not sure if it was quite the Mason-Dixon line, but there was a line. There was a North and a South. Now these ideologies have spread all throughout the country, as the country has boomed under the influx of diversity inside the country. They'll never recognize the booming of American society, becoming a world power, is post-World War II and the influx of diversity. And they think like when they destroy it, they'll have all this stuff still. This great American economy, just minus all the things they hate. And that's what delusion is. That's what delusion is. But it's important to understand that these things have happened before. This is not the first time. And in fact, this really hateful ideology was the norm in America until a very short time ago. When I was young, like open racism was normal. Normal. It's not normal anymore, but it is for half the country. And they're tired of you telling them that it's not. When I was a kid, misogyny was normal. What the fuck was your wife gonna do if you backhanded her? Nothing. Maybe go home with her parents for a couple days, but she ain't gonna survive without you. And here lately, it hasn't been normal. And half the country is tired of you telling them that it isn't normal. That's the conservative movement. It's generational outrage over a slew of issues. Transgenderism, you see that on the forefront because to them that is the epitome of the degradation of the left. Because in the America I grew up in, you didn't do that publicly. Especially where I grew up in North Carolina. But even here in Battle Creek, you didn't do that shit publicly. Now, you'd listen to Boy George and be edgy, but you wouldn't do that, unless you were at home by yourself. Because you knew better. Because bigotry was normal. And that's why it's on the forefront. That's why they're the first designated terrorists. Because to them, that is the epitome of the degradation of American society. Because they never understood what the American ideal was, ever. Because the American idea was never realized, ever. But why am I ranting? We're here to listen to a historian. I tell you, like, I've been off air, pretty much just playing video games and watching historians and shit, because my brain is functioning differently. It's half terrified, like I think I'm principled enough to do it till the end, which is terrifying. And half resolve. Like, all right, you're telling me I can't call you a fascist? Fuck you, fascist. Like, that's literally like, do they not understand how fucking stupid they are to go fascist over us calling them fascist? Like, how fucking stupid are you?
Of independent journalism, whether it's on Substack or YouTube or somewhere else, that there's hope there when it comes to media?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a lot of people are not, when they complain about the media, looking at the larger media ecosystem that is not just the big legacy media outlets, which continue to be important for a number of reasons. First of all, they have very deep pockets, so they can fight back against lawsuits. But second of all, a number of them really seem to be hedging their bets about what the future in the United States is going to bring. So they look in some ways as if they're kowtowing to an authoritarian administration, but they are also supporting really terrific journalists who are really doing the work. So I'm not ready to throw any babies out with any bathwater, but I do think the media ecosystem is one heck of a lot larger than those who are tearing their hair out and saying the media has failed us are giving credit to.
You know, when you sit down at night to write letters from an American, I imagine you wrestle with what we wrestle with here at Pod Save America all the time, which is of the barrage of news of the day that Trump has done. How do you sort through and separate the signal from the noise? What are the most important things that people need to know about? How do you avoid, we always worry about chasing Trump down a rabbit hole he wants us to chase down. How do you just sort of make decisions about what it is you're going to write about basically on a nightly basis?
So I maybe have a bit of an advantage there because I am a historian looking at the stories that change society. And that's not to say I get them right all the time by any stretch of the imagination. But when you write a book or when you teach a course or when you think broadly about the issues you care about, some things matter and some things don't. So one of the things that I do is if there are a number of stories, the days I hate are the days when you get what I call B- stories, 14 B- stories. There's not a lead, but there are a bunch of things that are important enough. What I tend to do is I think of it like an onion. I take a step back and I say, how do these things fit together in the story of America? And if that doesn't work, then I take another step back and do the same thing. And so, for today, for example, when you and I are recording this, which is Friday, September 5th, I've actually written a lot of tonight's letter because there were major stories that came out in foreign policy, in the president's assumption of power to.
I actually agree with that, Tom. I think that the term was used too much to the point like it was desensitized. And then you mix that with the degradation of like just civics in our public school systems. The attack on the public school system. Like right now, I don't even know how public schools are functioning, honestly. Like the attack has been so vicious on our public school system since Trump went in for the second term. Like even his first term was bad, but this term is, I don't know how they're functioning. Well, I know how they're functioning. Michigan just announced like a $6 billion cut to the budget. Because all the money's going to rich people. It's not going to, or maybe red states are getting shit. But whatever. But so I don't disagree with you. But like when it comes to like Trump, like we've always kind of known what he was. Like there's always been. Like those stories of his first wife, Ivanka, saying that the only book on his nightstand is Mein Kampf. Like his dad was a known white supremacist. Like this dude, like this, we've always known he was like icky when it came to women. Like none of this is like new to us. But I do agree, like the word was so desensitized. And civics, learning political philosophy just in general, in the most general of terms, is completely broken in America. Like our kids do not learn that shit. And in fact, I don't remember learning it in high school. It was already like the attack on public schools was well underway when I was in high school. I learned that shit after school. I started learning it in prison, like where I started learning a lot of shit. In prison, you have really no time but to read, But that's all beside the point. But no, I can agree with that. I think it definitely, and it wasn't just by the left. And you're not saying that. You're saying both sides. Yeah, both sides have utilized it to define their enemy, and people have just become desensitized to it, and they don't understand what it really is. That's why, like, when you throw up a fucking the definition of it and go through it word by word, they just reject it. Some just come out and say that's a left-wing definition. I'm like, well, bitch, I'm using Webster. Like,
to essentially kill people, let's call it that, and because of the economy. Now, those look like three very different stories, but if you take a step back in the onion, what it says to me is that we have had in the United States for at least 40 years now this image of what it means to be a strong American leader and how one constructs a strong American state. And the MAGA Republicans are putting that image, that mythology into place, and it's completely failing. So the story, to my mind today, as I look at the United States as a snapshot, which is what I try to do, sort of a la Alistair Cook and his letters from.
I'm sitting here thinking, because that's like twice now I've brought up those stories. Now, I believe that most people think that that's like a bitter ex-wife talking shit about her ex-husband, because I don't think she ever said that shit while they were together. So, it's a grain of salt. I believe that actions are louder than words. I've never judged Donald Trump as a fascist until I started seeing him do fascist shit. And that wasn't even so much in his first term. I think first term we got mild Donald Trump, and there was a lot of outrage because he was doing bad shit, but he had people around him reining him in to where he was doing mostly legal shit, just at the very boundaries of legality, right? To where now he just gives no fucks. It's like it's all about vengeance now. And honestly, like, in my honest opinion, like, he keeps going on about Russia, and I don't think it's because he's angry about it. I think it's because he's gloating because he got away with it. Because if you look at now, the only person in the world, there's probably a couple people in the world that's really happy about what's going on in America. But the person that's happiest right now is fucking Putin. Like, I don't think anybody could deny that.
America, it is the story of how the United States is having to grapple with the conflict between the ideology that a certain group of American citizens have embraced now for a long time, and how that ideology is clashing with reality. And at the other end of that, I find that story absolutely fascinating, intellectually as well as living through it. Because what does one do as a human being if the world that you have constructed in your mind turns out to be fake? Like, what does one do? And that larger story, to me, certainly sweeps in all the many news stories of today. But the story of humanity behind that is, what does America do when its 40 years of mythology are proven to be wrong? But even beyond that, as a human being, what does one do when one has created a false sense of who we are and is forced to decide that you're either going to have to push that ideology to the exclusion of reality, which seems to be what the president is currently doing, or forced to say, crap, I was wrong for 40 years, and I need to reorganize my brain and my country in such a way that I can move forward. I don't know which one of those is going to win out, but I think they are profoundly human questions as well as national questions. And at the end of the day, that's what I look for.
When you
So, like, even now, and she's probably, like, really concerned where the direction of the country is going, but even now she's, like, just looking at it from a historian's eyes. And what she's interested in, even right now, is how is the public reacting to Trump? And overall, on a historical level, she'll be looking at, all right, how does the general American public react to MAGA and the MAGA movement as a whole? And then she'll write a great book about it. And unfortunately, if the MAGA movement wins, she'll never be able to publish it here in America. I think I got my finger on the gain. Let me see. All right. I didn't fuck it up. Yeah, she'll probably have a hard time publishing it here in America. Because, all right, so whatever faction of MAGA wins out, if they win, and you know, we are suppressed, we are killed off and put in jail, then they got to deal with themselves. And you're going to have two different factions. You're going to have, even in the White House, you're going to have two different factions. You're going to have the Christian nationalist faction, the Project 2025 faction, who wants like Gilead in America, right? But they want to do it without the use of nuclear weapons if possible, because, you know, in Atwood's story, Gilead was fucked up from nuclear shit. They prefer to have the whole country minus 280 billion people. But then you have, you know, the white nationalist side that really want to instill like 1945 Germany in America, right? So, you know, whatever faction wins out there is going to determine the overall general public reaction to the MAGA movement. And, you know, as a history buff myself, I would love to see that. But, you know, if that were to occur, I don't think I'll be around to see it anymore. At least not freely. I'll be watching, you know, the public propaganda television on my from my prison cell at best case scenario.
Say, this is fascinating. When you say this 40-year image of a strong America, I take it that's some combination, because of the news of the day, which included, we're recording this on a Friday, very bad employment numbers coming out this morning. Is it a combination of sort of America as a strong economy, America as a strong military, and then what are the other elements of that that's the image that you see Trump pushing?
So remember that I am trained as a political historian, but my degree is my doctorate is actually in American culture, in looking at American society as a whole. My master's is in literature, for example, in American literature. And that matters because in this context, because what really happened after World War II was, with the expansion of the government to, regulate business and provide a basic social safety net and promote infrastructure and to protect civil rights. What happened were those people who didn't want it to do those things doubled down on the idea that if a government became powerful enough to do those things, it would become a socialist government, in that it would begin to redistribute wealth from hardworking white Americans to undeserving minorities, in this case, Black Americans. And that would be a form of socialism. And that image picked up directly from the period after the Civil War, when the former Confederates who ran up against the 15th Amendment and the creation of the Department of Justice in 1870, to say that they could no longer discriminate against their Black neighbors on racial grounds, began to say, hey, listen, we never had any problem with the fact our neighbors were Black. Our problem is the fact that they are poor. And if you let them have a say in the government, you let them have a vote, they are going to work together with poor white Americans to elect leaders who will promise them roads and schools and hospitals. And those things can only be paid for with white tax dollars, because
all right, so what she's saying right now is vitally important. So, and she's going to lay it out how even back then, post-Civil War, so way back in like late 1860s, 1870s, you know, they would use like socialism as their scapegoat. So for now, well over 150 years, socialism has been the great scapegoat of the movement conservatives moving throughout history. So, and that's important because, and especially what she just said. So, after the Civil War, and now there's the 15th Amendment, and like she said, the Department of Justice was instituted in 1870. Now you have legal repercussions against, you know, doing violence based on racism. Like, you can't just go out and beat up your black neighbors no more, or you can't say your black neighbors can't vote anymore because, you know, they're black, which is crazy. So, like, even, you know, during the civil rights movement, they were blaming socialism for why black people shouldn't be able to vote. Post-Civil War, why black people shouldn't be free and be able to be their neighbors. But post-Civil War, or post in the Civil Rights era, post-World War II, they had to change their argumentation, so it became a class war. Now, they still have that old racist gripe, right? Right, you took our slaves away from us. Now you're telling us they got to be our neighbors, right? Like, all right, can't say that no more. That can't be your legal reasoning anymore. So now you've got to take it to class warfare. And this was back in the 1850s, 1860s. So we have just outright class warfare from the Republican Party, from the conservative movement. And mind you, most of the people that vote conservative are not rich people. It's a complete just using that hatred, those grievances that people had, and giving them enemies to point at instead of the real enemies, which are the ones doing the pointing. And you do that generation after generation after generation until we get to the year 2025, and we're on the brink of what should be our third civil war. We should have had a second one shortly after the first one, but we didn't. We avoided that. We put a Band-Aid on it. We punted it, and we're dealing with it now.
White people in the American South were the only ones really who had taxable property. So that image that letting minorities, and that's going to expand in the 20th century to include women and gender minorities as well, but that letting minorities vote, have a say in their government, is by definition a form of socialism. It's a political understanding more than an economic understanding, the way socialism becomes defined in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But that construction, which really takes off in the United States in 1871, is countered immediately in that period by the image of the American cowboy, who in reality, about a third of American cowboys were men of color. They depended on the government more than any other region of the country in the West. There are many ways in which the myth of the American cowboy doesn't stack up against the reality, but that myth of the American cowboy, that the cowboy is a true American and wants nothing from the government but to be left alone. He dominates women. He dominates.
Well, no, I mean, you can. They're trying to do it in New York right now, Tom. But they demonize him. You know, they call him a socialist because in America, that's a bad word. In America, we automatically lump socialism with like authoritarian dictatorship, awful authoritarian regimes. We're not talking about an economic philosophy. It's just like she said. It's a culturalization of it. It's a political version of it, right? Which isn't socialism. And what she's describing, it isn't socialism. What she's describing is scapegoat. Socialism has become the American scapegoat. It's the Great Red Scare. And they've been very, very successful at it. But now, like, there's this changing of the guard, right? Like, I can clearly see, you know, Stephen Miller trying to implement National Socialism. You know, buying 10% of Intel, right, is just a first step, a dabble, a dipping of the toe of National Socialism. And a lot of people don't know what National Socialism is. Right? Like, I just had this argument on Facebook with CJ Cox, who tried to argue that Nazis were National Socialists, therefore socialists. And I'm like, bro, are you arguing that the Nazis weren't fascist? Are you seriously doing that? National Socialism is what the neo-Nazis were. They completely took over all industry and put it under the regime. They were fascists that shut down all conversation, all votes. You know, if they did vote, they were fake elections. And you could go in for hours and hours and hours into what the Nazis were and what National Socialism was. The first time I ever heard the word National Socialism, I had no idea what it was. I had no idea that that's what Hitler was. A lot of people don't know that's what Hitler was. Or if they do know it, then they associate socialism with that. Because, like, again, we don't teach, unless you're going to college to learn it, you're not going to learn political philosophy in America. Or unless you, like, try to learn it on your own. You're just not going to. That's why, like, every conservative in America doesn't know he's not a conservative. Every conservative in America has no idea that they're a Dixiecrat. They have no idea. They think Republicans have always been movement conservatives, and that's how it's always been. And it isn't. And she's not wrong. I don't have no problems working with, like, true conservatives if they're true to their political philosophy. I don't think Liz Cheney's that. But I don't even have a problem working with Liz Cheney. My problem was putting her up on that stage in a Democratic national election. The fuck you doing? That's stupidity. You can work with these people, but don't put them on stage with you when you're trying to win left votes.
The minorities around him, and he's good with the gun, and he just wants to be left alone.
They were fascist. Yeah, I didn't explain it well because I'm not. I shouldn't have even kind of went into it because I don't have the time to explain it well. Not if I want to actually watch this.
That image of the American cowboy really is central to pushing back against the government that expands after the Civil War in order to promote Black rights. And to some degree, brown rights, but mostly Black rights.
Yeah, if they played along. Yeah. I can't remember what it's called. I used to know all the terminology. Because Germany had a very interesting industry system, or a pretty devastated industry system after World War I.
20th century, that image of the American cowboy does the same thing. So those people who were trying to destroy the modern American government after World War II really don't get anywhere until Brown versus Board of Education, the 1954 Supreme Court decision, which says that segregation in public schools is unconstitutional. With that, they begin really to lionize the idea of the American cowboy, which had fallen out of American culture during the Depression and the Dust Bowl, when in fact people in the American South and the American West were really keen on federal help because they were, losing their land and starving. That image comes back in the 1950s. By the end of the 1950s and the early 1960s, Westerns dominate television, which is a new medium. For example, Bonanza, that incredibly famous Western, is the first TV show in color. It goes international. That idea.
I mean, I didn't even grow up in that era. I grew up like the generation after Bonanza, but I grew up on Bonanza. Like that version of the American cowboy, Michael Landon as Little Joe. I grew up on that shit.
Of the American cowboy as being central to what it means to be an American becomes a political statement by 1960, when you get the rise of Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater with his stance as an American cowboy. He's always out there with a white hat saying, I came from Arizona before we had any, of these stupid regulations. His family, by the way, depended on government money. that image of the American cowboy as the central figure of American history and of America really becomes this political statement for the people who take over the republic.
Yeah. So, see if I can explain a little better. Like they use the term National Socialist because, as I understand it, like a good chunk of Germany was socialist at the time, and the Nazi Party really needed that support on its rise to power. And it's this whole like mask on, mask off thing. You know, it was mask on for the first part. You know, and yeah, they suckered a lot of the socialists. It's how they were able to dominate the socialists and like they did. But yeah, really, like plenty of historians can really go into it. It's been one of the main things that I listen to when I'm going, you know, when I'm winding down for the evenings is mainly like World War II shit. Like I'm fascinated by, and it's been on forever, but like World War II in color, the long ass history thing back when history was still like the History Channel. Yeah, I've been fascinated. I've been like absorbing myself in that past fucking, I don't know, month.
Party that a true American wants nothing from the government. You should get rid of business regulation, get rid of a basic social.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're beyond like a peaceful divorce. You know, I'm almost in agreement at this point with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like, we need a divorce. I just don't know how you do it with the political map the way that it is. You know, but I think we're beyond a peaceful divorce at this point.
Safety net, get rid of government promotion of infrastructure and so on, and dominate others with force. And
so
that was a rhetorical
here.
Thing for Goldwater and for people like Ronald Reagan, who did the same thing. Even George W. Bush picks it up. But in this incarnation under MAGA, it has become the driving force. It has gone from being rhetoric to being an image of what America should be that is driving their behavior in any number of ways, right? So you're seeing this attack on this alleged attack on the cigarette boat that theoretically, according to the administration, was smuggling drugs. We're having the report that just came out in the New York Times today of the Navy SEAL attempt in 2019 to bug North Korea that ended up in the unacknowledged death of 2 to 3 Korean fishermen who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. You're seeing this idea that the government can simply do whatever it wants to assert its will by force. And at the same time, this concept that if you get rid of the government intervention in the economy through regulations, for example, and social safety nets and so on, you will return America to this great past is,
I'll be back in a second.
I think, where you're seeing the extraordinary attempt of the administration to throw its weight around and simply dictate what the government thinks should be happening with the economy when the actual numbers are devastating. So that's what I mean by the idea of the mythology coming up against the reality. And I will say one of the things that I think is fascinating in this moment is that image of the American cowboy was always just an image. We have these wonderful reports of people who knew Buffalo Bill, for example, and he knew quite deliberately that he was constructing an image. He would literally wear certain clothes when he went to perform some great feat of bravado so that he could then go on stage and say, "These are the very clothes I wore." But there was another image in that same period of what it meant to be an American that was much more true to American history. And that was to be somebody who believed in community and believed in making sure that you protected your weakest members and made it possible for everybody to have a shot at equal access to resources so they could work hard and rise. And the replacement of the cowboy image with that image of America is one that has real possibilities, I think, for our future.
Isn't that the tension or the back and forth we've been going through in this country for a long time, right? Between those two things. Like you have George Bush, who really did, George W. Bush, who modeled a...
All right, 15-year-olds. Yeah, I have my camera back on in a minute.
Cowboy in so many ways, invaded the country for basically no reason. He was clearing brush all the time. Like that was a big part of it. And then you pivot to, then you go to Obama, who is sort of the opposite.
You know, I really should not have to turn off my camera every time my daughter comes up here. It's an unfortunate state of American civility that I have to have my camera off when my daughter comes up here because people will use her. And it's bullshit. Like, there's no human decency anymore.
Of that, community was the core part of his message. He was a community organizer. Red states and blue states. We care about our neighbors in the red states. We all, so much of his message from when I worked with him is like, why you have to care about the homeless veteran 3 states over, or the kid who's not getting educated, or the family who's going hungry, why that matters to you, even if you're not that person. And then you revert back to Trump, right? Is that sort of the push and pull that we've been in for centuries now, basically, as a country?
I wouldn't go as far back as centuries. I would say since at least the 1950s, but there's a critical piece that goes back to what we were talking about before. And that's one of the real strengths of the movement conservatives who took over the Republican Party was their sense of narrative, was their storyline. The little guy against the empire, right? That's Star Wars, 1977. That's Reagan rising. That's exactly the sort of ethos that Reagan picks up when he runs for office for the president in 1980. And that's a really powerful myth. The idea that, you are in charge of your destiny, even though the reality is that you're deeply tied in our era into so many different parts of a global economy, for example, a global political system, health systems, climate change, and all of the different ways in which we are reliant on and reflect a larger national and international community. That story is really important. And from the 1980s, at least 1987, after the end of the Fairness Doctrine and the rise of talk radio, which did not begin as political, that simply began as a way to use the AM radio dial as the FM dial was taking off much more effectively because of its higher quality. You had the right wing pushing this image that every man, and that was a deliberate word, can do it on his own. What we are seeing now, I think, with the rise of independent media and people like you and so many individuals articulating a different vision of the country, is a narrative pushback to that other powerful storyline. So even though people like Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris talked a lot about the importance of community, and people who are within those communities believe it, it simply was not getting the national grip on the imagination that the individual imagery did. And one of the key aspects, I think, of what I do, and one of the things that I think is most important about American history that has been stripped out of it for a long time, is the sense of agency. The idea of community is not about, here we're all sort of in this mush together and, somehow the government will help us. The idea of community in our history is that if you are an individual, you have the power to change the country. You have the power to change your life. You have the power to change the country, and you have the power to change the world by working together the way the people did during World War II, or the strikers did in the late 1890s, or the civil rights workers did in the 1860s, 1870s, and 1960s and 1970s.
Yeah, and that's what they're failing to see is like, we made this country, this juggernaut that it is, this economic system that is like the envy of the world, because of our diversity, because we stopped with all that old American bullshit, because of civil rights, because of the women's liberation movement. We're great because I can sit here as the raging atheist and just trash religion, right? Because I'm free to do that. And you're free to hate watch me. You're free to fan watch me. You're free to turn the fucking channel. Right? Like, but I do think, like, we've really got to seriously, once all the dust has settled from this, however long that takes, if there is still an America, if there is still a democracy here, a republic democracy, we're going to have a serious conversation about the internet, about radicalization, about truth, right? Like, we as a society, if we make it past this, really have to look at ourselves collectively as a society and fix a lot of wrongs within that society. And I think the internet is one of those things that we dance around it because of privacy and all these really like complex rights issues. And let's be honest, lots of money involved. It's become part of the social collective conscious. But like, and I've said it myself, and it is hard to believe, and I still think even in today's day and age, it's hard to do. But it does happen a lot where, you get down a rabbit hole and you can be radicalized fairly quickly, especially if the people know what they're doing, right? Like I said, I did the story on Catherine Grove, who was like this kind of normal, maybe fundamentalist Christian family, white girl who got online and I don't know how long it took. According to the family, it didn't take long. Started talking to the Church of Wells down in Texas, and one day she's just gone. 6 months. And I don't think it was 6 months at a college that if this kid was radicalized to the left, which, I don't see a lefty when I see the communications, what I've seen so far of the communications of Tyler, but that's a different stream. But radicalization can happen very quickly, right? And like I said the other day, like we've all seen it when it comes to our family, apolitical family members that are suddenly now just hardcore MAGAs that won't even talk to their liberal family members, we've all seen it. We've all seen the radicalization, but that was done on a much wider level. But we're going to really have to look at ourselves in the mirror if we're going to come out of like post-truth era. People don't like post-truth era, but it's literally the best description of the time period we live in. And maybe it all comes to an end tomorrow, because I guess, rapture happens tomorrow. So we're all going to hell.
And that concept that you actually can play a heroic role in the world as part of a community, not simply as part of, the cowboy riding off into the sunset. I think that focus on agency is a much more engaging narrative than one that simply says, hey, we need to be nice to the kindergartner 3 states away.
More of my conversation with Heather Cox Richardson in a moment. But first, do you love watching Crooked's podcast on video but hate ads? Well, we've got great news. You can now stream ad-free the individualism, the frontiersman, go west, young man, all of that. They've latched onto that and made that their own ideology and sort of fit their conservative policy preferences in under that. I take it that 1950s is when this started, is because it's once now is Brown v. Board, right? It's that now all of a sudden we are the quest of a democracy becoming a multiracial democracy is what sort of leads to the conflict here.
Yes, but I'm going to take exception to the use of the word conservative to encompass this radical right, because they have been radical since the very beginning. And by that, I mean that traditional conservatism, as it was conceived as an ideological principle by Edmund Burke during the French Revolution, said that it was a grave error for any country to try and govern based on an ideology, because pretty soon you were going to start trying to make people fit the ideology rather than ideology to fit the people. And instead, he argued that government could be used as a positive force, not simply as a negative force, the way it had been conceived previously, and that leaders should govern according to what would create stability. So in his day, that meant the aristocracy, that meant the church, that meant, the property systems that kept people having a stake and believing in the enforcement of the law in his country. In our day, what creates stability is different. And one of the things that created stability in the 20th century was the New Deal / middle way government of FDR and Eisenhower, a Democrat and a Republican. And the people who came in and wanted to destroy all that were sort of enfants terribles. They were the people who wanted to tear up the things that
And you know, like, you still see the remnants of what she's speaking out about, like the movement conservatives that came in and really like were hyper focused on tearing up everything about the New Deal, everything that like rebounded this country from the Great Depression, from the mismanagement of these fucking people. That they came in and were so focused on just destroying the New Deal. And you see that in reality today still playing out, like just the way these movement conservatives still bash the New Deal, even though, like, I don't even think you can argue that it wasn't like the most successful policy in American history.
We're creating stability in order to do exactly what Burke cautioned against, to impose an ideology on the country and to force people to fit into it. And that is precisely what we're seeing nowadays. They are not conservatives. They are radical extremists.
Yeah, that's a point well taken, especially when you think about Trump and this image of the government not being involved in the economy. And you have the Trump administration now taking, in the most, technically, by definition, socialist as possible, taking stakes in American and companies now, right? Whether it's NVIDIA or elsewhere. Yeah, it's conservatism. Like there is the actual philosophy of it, and then there's I guess radical right. I guess is probably the proper way to describe it.
Yeah, they use the word conservative as a title. That's why they're called movement conservatives, because it's a political movement that uses the title, rather like the Fox News channel calls its signature show Fox News. Yeah. It's not news. Right. It was never news, but that's the name of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, I mean, this is all exactly why I wanted to have you on.
Like if I was somebody that watched Fox News and I found that out, like this isn't news. It's just the name of the entertainment program that I'm watching is called news. Like it's news satire. Like that would piss me the fuck off. Like, you've literally been lying to me, and I've been taking this shit seriously, and you're not even news. And most people don't know that. Or they think it's a left-wing talking point. When it's just blatant deception by billionaires to fool dumb people.
Because one of the reasons why I love your writing is it really helps me take what is happening on a day-to-day basis here and put it into larger historical context. Because a term you hear people like me use and you hear on the news all the time, where people just reacting to the craziness of Trump, whether it's Trump 1.0 or Trump 2.0, this is unprecedented, right? These things have never happened before, because it feels, we obviously have a short-term memory problem as a country right now, but some of this stuff feels impossible to imagine. And your writing helps me understand that not all of this is unprecedented, that this is part of a larger American story. So what's your reaction when you hear people say this is unprecedented? How do you, what are the historical parallels you see to the moment we're in right now here in the U.S.?
Well, it's a trope to say history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And there are ways in which we're in an unprecedented time, because by definition, all history is unprecedented, or all modern affairs are unprecedented. And certainly the fact that we have sitting in the White House a president who seems determined to destroy American democracy is unprecedented. That's new. But he comes from a long line of right-wing reactionaries who are eager to instate a situation in the country where a few wealthy white men rule over everybody else. So in the larger scheme of things, there are certainly continuities in this moment. The thing that always sort of surprises me is the degree to which...
That's the thing that I'll never understand about any of these fucking movements is... And I think Robin is right. People want to be fooled. People want to be led, right? Like, people don't really want to have to think about the hardship for themselves. Because it's really hard for me to understand how you could want a few people to rule everything, to have everything, as long as you have enough. Like, I don't get that. Like, I don't understand that. Like, I think we're all capable of ruling ourselves. We don't need some like strong men telling us how to think, telling us how to feel, telling us what to hate, what to be outraged about. Like, I don't know. I think I always just had a better picture of humanity than that. But unfortunately, I think that most people just live in that. All of a sudden, my voice is trying to go away. Like, most people just live in that herd mentality. Like, they just want to be herded along. Like, even like liberals, I kind of look at the same way. It's just like, you know, you want to be herded along by your leaders and not expand your thinking, not expand your compassion, your anything about yourself. You know, like, that's one thing I can honestly say that I'm proud of myself is, despite all my failures in life, despite my poverty, you know, like, I'm always trying to improve myself. Even when I was a drunk, I was trying to improve that by still drinking, and it just never worked out. You know, if you truly want to improve, sometimes you have to, you know, just cut shit off. You know, kind of like where I am with talking to fucking Republicans, to talking to Confederates. It's like, for most of my life, you've been mask on, and you told me a lot of lies that were never true. Like, you know, for an example, you know, you told me, like, the Second Amendment is our God-given right to an individual right to a firearm, to protect ourselves from a tyrannical government. But you never believed that. You believed it was your God-given right to have a firearm, but not everybody's. And we see that playing out, right? Like, you know, do you think, like, you know, I don't think transgender folks are going to be able to have guns if they're, you know, on a terrorist designation. Do you? Like, just having a gun could be like a very bad problem. Like, I don't. And then, you know, there's people like me who committed nonviolent crimes, you know, 30 years ago. I can't have a gun. You know, like, never really believed in this bullshit they espouse. Never believed in free speech. You know, free speech for them. You know, free speech for thee, but not for me. And we see that playing out. Like, liars. Like, right now, they're masked half off. After, you know, if they can successfully get rid of all the transgender, extreme, radical left terrorists and all their accomplice allies, which is pretty much everybody on the left, according to them, then, you know, maybe they'll be able to decide what their movement's all about. Because so far it's just like, you know, hating us. It's why you outlaw us. It's why you outlaw transgender folks. It's why you're outlawing Antifa, like, can we even say anti-fascist anymore? Like, you know, if I post an I am Antifa meme, is that like against the law now? Do I not have my freedom of speech anymore? But again, like, none of this is new. This is all shit that they've been trying to do or aiming to do for a really long time. It's just mask half off now. And soon it'll be mask full off, and all those idiots that followed these people thinking like it included them too, they'll find out.
Americans look toward Germany for their precedents in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a scholar of America, so I know.
Talk to Maya. What's up with Maya? What's going on, Native? Is Maya here?
About as much about Germany as anybody who reads sort of generally, which means not much. But of course, we've had a movement in the United States that looks very much like the movement we're in right now before. And that was, of course, in the American South from about 1874 to about 1965, the reaction to the expansion of a multiracial democracy after the Civil War led to the very pattern we are seeing today. The argument that if people of color vote, they are going to want a redistribution of wealth from white people to black people to do things like build roads and schools and hospitals, which is what I said before, and I will add to that now. Fund prosthetics, because after the Civil War, the United States becomes a leader in prosthetics because of the amputations and the losses of eyes during the war, something not a lot of people know, but I think is kind of cool. We are again, by the way, because of Iraq and Afghanistan. But they argue at that time in the 1870s and the 1880s that you should not permit men at this point of color to vote because they are essentially going to create a system where poor people are going to run the government, and that's going to destroy the accumulation of property. And from that, you start to get this increasing idea that those people who support black voting, who support the Republican Party in the American South, are anti-American. They are dangerous. They are polluting the body politic. From that, you get the idea that they should be purged from American society. And that tangles up with our incredibly ugly history of racism to turn into, really high numbers of lynching. From about 1888, there was a lull between the 1870s and 1888. Between 1888, 1889, and into the 1930s, you see this attempt to purge from the United States people who are racial, ethnic, and to some degree religious minorities in order to create a pure America. And of course, that dovetails beautifully with the rise of the Nazis in the United States, as well as in Germany in the 1920s. And so when people look to Germany and say, oh, we look just like the Nazis, maybe we do, maybe we don't. I don't know. I don't know that much about the Nazis, but we sure as hell look a lot like the former Confederates in the American South after the Civil War. And then when you turn around and you look at the fact that the administration has just ordered the rehanging of a portrait of Robert E. Lee at West Point and is, talking about renaming all the military.
Yeah, I didn't know about the portrait. I knew they were renaming the military bases. And yeah, they're just going full Confederate with everything. So yeah, I mean, it's very well possibly could be like 3 different factions. Although I would imagine like the Confederates would team up with the white supremacists. You have your Stephen Miller faction. And Stephen Miller is from all reporting, just rules with an iron fist, hated by everybody. But he's your white supremacist faction, and he's probably, a one-man army, the strongest faction of all the fuckers. You have your Christian nationalist faction, but then you probably also have your true Confederate faction. Now, although the Christian nationalists and the Confederacy have been well blended, so actually they would probably just be part of that Christian nationalist faction. Although some of the Confederates would be true fascists. So I don't know. That would be like, an interesting, like, I wish I would still be alive to see it kind of moment, like be a fly on the wall in my next life, if I can reincarnate that fast, to be a fly on that wall, to see the bloodbath that's going to ensue once we're all taken care of.
Bases back to Confederate names and complaining about the removal of Confederate statues. It seems to me that that's the comparison that has real teeth.
It's so interesting, right? Like these MAGA types. It's like we're so.
Yeah, I mean, earlier in my side chat, we kind of saw how that landed. Like Jill came in hot. Like, you're still calling us fascist. And I'm like, nah, bro, today I'm calling you Confederates. And I got a thumbs up from Jill. He really liked that comparison. Like, Jill, like, yeah, that's what we are.
America first. And what we celebrate are the people who waged war against America, right? The ones who lost the war. And it's hard to see that through anything other than a purely racial lens, right?
Yes, although I would add that the rise of the concept of the Confederate soldier as being a symbol of the United States of America really takes off in the late 19th century. And that's when you start to see those statues going up. They do not go up immediately after the war. They go up in the 1890s and forward. And the argument behind that at the time is that it's those men who were trying to preserve the idea that the government should stay small. It should not get involved in racial issues. It should not become, and they use this word, a socialist government.
The lost cause narrative. I've had many a discussion with CJ Cox about it. I've discussed it several times on my channel. It is how they have kept the Confederacy alive through generations of teaching their children the lost cause narrative. Civil War wasn't about slavery. Not really, although we kind of like to have our slaves back. Civil War was about states' rights. Civil War was about federal government should not be able to tell states what they can and cannot do. It's a completely false narrative. Civil War was directly fought because of slavery. It's without a doubt. The states seceded because they didn't think they would be allowed to continue their slave trade. It's in all of their declarations of war. It's without a doubt the true historical narrative. But the lost cause narrative, I think, is why we're seeing what we see today. Because those Confederates spread, and that lost cause narrative spread. And, you know, like I said, they sold their soul and they started teaming up with fascists and they started pointing at the immigrant. Modern Republican immigration narrative is the narrative that the neo-Nazis, the skinheads, were using in Oregon State in the 1990s. It's if you go watch American History X, it sounds like any modern day Republican talking about immigration. That's what it sounds like. Not, the scene where, Edward Norton is it's all black and white and it's before they're going into the grocery store and he's giving them the immigration speech, right? It's like the common Republican narrative now. But that's what the far right extremist in the shadows was saying back in the 90s. That's how far we've come.
So it's the entwining of the racism of the Confederacy and the post-war objection to the idea of an active government that defends civil rights and defends economic rights. That's important too. Those really can't be untangled. And that's one of the ways I think that the MAGA movement became possible. And you saw this back in the Nixon administration when they talked a lot about this, that you could hide racism under an economic argument, which is precisely, of course, what the former Confederates did in 1871 when the Department of Justice said, you keep killing off your black neighbors, you're going to go to federal court and you're going to lose and you're going to end up in prison. And they said, oh, no, we don't have any problem at all with race, which was just ridiculous. I mean, it's literally the same people before and after the argument changes. But our problem is when you let poor people vote, they vote for a redistribution of wealth. And that we can't put up with. And that's the sort of argument that you have seen take over our political discourse really since Nixon.
It sort of feels like this movement, it happens in fits and starts over time, right? It's a reaction movement, happens in reaction to something. Is to go from a Republicans like John McCain and Mitt Romney into
all right, so real quick again, they utilized their Southern strategy. They kept racism alive, but they reach a wider base when, you can point to, your shitty life and how Democrats aren't, helping you out, right? Trump made a lot of grounds with that in this last election, or in his first election, I believe it was. And then you had the whole Black MAGA movement, the Blexit movement with Candace Owens and Kanye West. That really did a lot of damage too. But I don't know. I kind of lost the frame of my narrative there, or the frame of my thoughts there. So we'll just continue. But yeah, I mean, she makes a lot of sense. Like these, this shit has been intentional for a very long time, and it's all over old grievance. You know, like most people assume in 1920s, 1930s America would be a good time period to kind of associate with the Make America Great thing, because you had the whole, I don't know, the opulent era of American society where pretty much just rich people ruined the country to the point of the Great Depression, the Gilded Age of America. But a lot of it is grievances that go well past and before the Civil War. And it's always been the same scapegoat. That's the other common theme. It's the theme that we get so lost in it now because there's an actual somewhat slight sliver of a socialism thing going on in America now, and it's very, very small. It's very small. Like, it's loud on Twitter, but it's a very small movement. Very small. But it's been the scapegoat for 150 fucking years. And honestly, if you've made a thing your scapegoat for 150 fucking years and shit hasn't gotten better, guess what? People are going to start looking at the scapegoat. That's just fucking facts, bro.
Although there were obviously candidates who were heirs to the future MAGA movement, like Sarah Palin, or political figures like Sarah Palin in 2008, maybe Rick Santorum or someone else in 2012. Is the rise of Trump only possible because of the election of Barack Obama? Like, is that the triggering event, do you think, or am I oversimplifying it?
No, I don't think you're over. But I want to answer that. But let me ask you something first.
Yeah.
Because I think this is a really central and interesting question. What do you think drives political?
Actually, John, that's actually very accurate for Candace Owens. When Candace Owens first started on YouTube, she went under the moniker of Red Pill Black, I believe it was. And one of her most famous series, the thing that made Candace Owens was her Life of the Coon series. I shit you not. It was way back when I was, like, before I was even raging atheist. I was a channel called Life Considered. A small little political channel, and I mainly just covered Red Pill Black and the crazy shit she said about Colin Kaepernick. And like, most of that channel was dedicated to like trying to get Colin Kaepernick fucking capped, yo.
Political change. Do you think
like,
it's people?
Like, she literally was like trying to get that man killed. I mean, don't sue me, Candace, but that was my take on it. Like, what the fuck?
Do you think it's ideas? Do you think it's money? Do you think it's foreign affairs? What do you think creates the kind of shift that you just identified?
I don't think it's foreign affairs. It can be a big international event with huge implications in the United States, like 9/11 or a war like Vietnam. I think it is. I think there's no simple answer to this, at least that I can come up with. I think the economic situation in any one moment can drive change, right? It creates the conditions perhaps where people are looking for change. I think the economy in 2024 and inflation I don't know that Trump gets elected in a different environment, right? Where people are feeling so stressed that they're willing to take risks. And I think individual people can, I'm not like an subscriber to the great man of history, but sometimes you need a figure who can mobilize a movement.
Yeah. Another interesting thing about Candace Owens, she always had money behind her. Like her first YouTube page, like when I first came across Candace, it was because my left-wing friends were telling me that, she used to be a left-wing person and she created this doxing site. And she doxed like a lot of fucking Republicans, like a lot of them. And then like the left turned on her. And that's why she turned on the left, is because the left just eviscerated her for doxing all those Republicans. But like her channel was like 3 months old the first time I saw it, and she was already like 100,000 subscribers or some shit like that. Like, she always had money behind that channel.
And so I think like what happens in 2008 doesn't happen without Barack Obama. What happens in 2016 probably doesn't happen with Donald Trump. And you can say the similar things about, better than me, but throughout history. So I think it's probably a little bit of all of the above, I guess?
So I think ideas change history. I think ideas change society, and all the things you identified are effective only in how they are defined by a society. And that means that the people who tell the stories, who tell people how they should interpret different things, make all the difference. So if you go back, before I go back to what you asked about with the election of Barack Obama, which is crucially important, let me explain what I mean by comparing, and I'm probably going to make people's heads explode, but comparing Lyndon Baines Johnson to Ted Cruz.
Okay, I can't wait to hear this. This is interesting.
Well, think about who they are, right? They are both. They are both supremely self-centered politicians who care deeply about how they're perceived by other people. They are very strong personalities, and they both come from Texas. And one of them used his power, twisted arms, I mean, quite aggressively, to make the United States more responsive to those who had been marginalized or left behind. The other one amassed power by doing the opposite. So what makes the difference between the two of them? Why did one try to garner attention and power by doing good, and the other one by doing the opposite? And the answer to that for me is the way a society defines what is a way to get power, what is a way to get popular. So if you start there with the idea that the intellectual trains that a society lays down, the intellectual ideas that a society lays down are central to the way that people interpret politics and the way people react to politics. And you take a look at this idea that I laid down early on, that from the movement conservatives, that individuals should not be hampered in any way by the government. And they should be free to amass money. They should be able to dominate people of color and to dominate women, and should just be able to do whatever they want, which is, by the way, a very gendered look at the way the world should work. You see within the movement conservatives who take over the Republican Party an increasing emphasis on the idea that anybody who disagrees with them should be purged. And by the 1990s, after the Motor Voter Act of 1993, and this is when Newt Gingrich is running around. I mean, he still is running around, but I mean, rising.
All right, so Newt Gingrich becomes important because Newt Gingrich pretty much signaled he started the death clock of the true conservative movement within the Republican Party. I've talked about on this channel, like, a lot of the wars on quote unquote American society started under Republican rule. The war on drugs, Republican thing. The war on poverty, a Republican thing. Food stamps was a Republican thing. And Newt Gingrich comes along and he was like, yeah, we're gonna get rid of all the people that aren't far right enough, right? And Newt Gingrich is really the guy that leads the conservative Republican Party of the 80s into the new movement conservative party of the 1990s. The party that would force Bill Clinton to move to the middle, to do any governing at all, and to do some fairly decent governing. But it was this time period that really started to corrode what used to be the Republican Party. I think I see a spider. I hate spiders. I'm like arachnophobic as fuck. Oh, you've got to go, Mr. Spider. Completely lost my train of thought. But yeah, Newt Gingrich, this is where she's going to start talking about Newt. Very important person. I'm going to kill a spider.
In the political movement. You see the attempt to use language to purge from the political system Democrats. That is, Republicans are asked by a PAC associated with Newt Gingrich to refer to Democrats as traitors, weak, socialist, and to refer to Republicans as strong, powerful, American, patriot. After the Motor Voter Act of 1994, Republicans begin to start talking about the idea that Democrats can only win through voter fraud. That's when you start to see them talking about voter fraud. There is no evidence of voter fraud then or now. There's a lot of evidence of election fraud, which is a different thing. But they begin to attack the legitimacy of Democrats to hold office. And that really takes off with the election of Bill Clinton, whom they go after for being corrupt from the very beginning. Remember, there was a scandal from the very beginning about...
Yeah, and that's been the narrative, like, with Republicans, right? Like, they try to talk about, like, Trump derangement syndrome, where we literally had, like, this political candidate speaking to our known adversary, Russia, telling them to, like, release everything on his political opponent. You know, a person like in his rallies telling people to beat the shit out of like whatever Democrat was there to protest him. You know, like just this different element of you know, Trump resistance as opposed to like fake outrage over every fucking political figure that's come out on the left. Bill Clinton, who tried to play, you know, he kind of set that playbook of playing the progressive and then moving to the middle. And then, you know, like Barack Obama ran with that playbook. Joe Biden is just like never even pretended to be a progressive, right? He just good old middle of the road Joe, you know, gonna do what the corporations really want him to do. Gonna probably bow down to Israel, you know, good old middle of the road Joe, you know. And yet they still branded all of these people as these outrageous radicals that were just too radical to govern the nation. And like I've literally seen like liberals discussing like throwing the far left under the bus in this new like Trump wave since Charlie Kirk's death of like, we're going to get rid of the far left radical extremists. And they think that that doesn't include them. And that's laughable because no, you're like, he's been calling all of you us forever. It's like, it's kind of insulting. And I'm not even a far lefty. I wouldn't consider myself max left. You know, I try to be open-minded. I really like what a lot of people on the max left say. There's a lot of stuff they say I don't like. But, you know, like, those Democrats, like, shit, I haven't really considered myself a Democrat. Like, I haven't been, like, a card-carrying Democrat in quite a while. Like, I vote Democrat because I have to. But I haven't considered myself a Democrat in a long time. I've way outpaced their political evolution. Their political evolution, in fact, has went the opposite direction of where I've went. You know, so it's like, yeah, it's ridiculous. Like, the whole left is the radical left, and that includes all the center right folks, all you rhinos that have joined us in the wake of, you know, you teabaggers aren't right, far right enough.
A travel agency.
Or at least you didn't kiss the ring well enough like some of the other teabaggers did.
See, I don't even remember what it was about.
There was the travel agency. There was Whitewater. I mean, there was the Vince Foster. It was all like sort of right wing fever dreams for a long time up until obviously the very, very end.
Right. And then at the very end, in that next election in 19...
Yeah, like I considered doing like current events, staying away from Charlie Kirk. You know, it's been 4 days. Do current events because there's so much of it. And I decided to do this today because I listened to this at work and it really kind of centered me. But yeah, that's just fucking ridiculous. Puff asks, hey, Knock, how about Trump announcing that we are going to be reinvading Afghanistan? It's beyond, like, ridiculous isn't word, the appropriate word, right? Like, it's beyond ridiculous. It's beyond, beyond reality, right? Like, I firmly come to the conclusion that this man has been a deranged old man with dementia for a long time, and he has somehow seeped his infection into these people that were already infected with grievance. And now we're living under this madman, the Mad King's dementia, and none of it makes any fucking sense. And the dementia-addled half of the population are just willing to go along with it. Like, how is he going to oppress the left if we're going back to war in Afghanistan? Like, none of it makes any sense. Can somebody please explain it to me like I'm a 2-year-old?
98, after a Miami mess of a mayoral election, Florida began to purge the voter rolls, and they purged about 100,000 voters off the voter rolls in Florida before the 2000 election. And we know how the 2000 election went. It came down to a recount in Miami-Dade County that was stopped by the Brooks Brothers riot. Roger.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing. Like, he really wants us to not talk about the Epstein files. So I think that we definitely need to shift focus there as much as I can. But, like, for me, like, there's a lot of, you know, I've watched a few documentaries on it, but I've never taken notes on those documentaries. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's going to take quite a bit of research for me to honestly to have any kind of conversation about the Epstein files. But yeah, maybe I can start streaming that research. You know, we'll just research Epstein, and that'll be streams.
Stone was a player in that, in which he later said in an interview, you know, the Democrats thought it was about protecting the constitutional norms. We knew it was a battle. And interestingly enough, Black observers of that fight in 2000 saw it as a political struggle that mirrored the worst of the KKK years. Then that's 2000. And then when you have George W. Bush in office, and the Republicans start to think that they really have gotten a lock on the system through voter suppression primarily. But then they also believe through their ideology and through their control of media, which has a long history as well. But then you get in 2008, the election of Barack Obama. And this is complete anathema. This is how you get, on the night of his inauguration, Mitch McConnell joining together with a number of the leaders of the Republican Party saying, we don't care if we agree with anything he does. Our only goal is to make sure he's a one-term president. Because the idea is that the Democrats, who are now defined within the Republican Party as being illegitimate in terms of governance, must be purged from power. So that's 2008. He takes office 2009. What do you get in 2010? You get Operation Red Map. You get the redistricting of Democratic-dominated states that has been supported by an enormous amount of Republican money with that explicit goal.
Yeah, you notice how, like, every time they show that map, whether it's on mainstream media or Republicans talking about it, you know, they never include that, right? They never include how, and they always both sides it, and yeah, Democrats do it too, but on such a smaller level, and Democrats try to play fair with the gerrymandering, but they never mention Operation Red Map, right? Like, they never mention how they stole that map. Like, it's all just, like, fundamentally flawed, our election system. And it's like she's pointing out through all of this, like, the thing that take away from the history of this movement, conservatism, is that their core tenet is to take absolute power. It always has been. So they can address all those past grievances, right? Absolute power. And it started with Newt Gingrich, the delegitimizing of your political opponent, right? And they project that onto us. They say that's what we do, but it's not, right? We've sat here and watched as this Republican Party has moved farther and farther right, and continue to both sides it. The media continues to both sides it, as if there's a both sides to it. But that's not good enough for them. No, it has to be a complete repression. And then in the midst of that delegitimizing of the political opposition, you come to the natural conclusion that Republican democracy can no longer exist. Liberal democracy can no longer exist in one-party rule. So you have the desire, though they've been masked on, they haven't said it. And then, oh boy, in the Mehdi Hassan fucking debate, went out and said all the shit way too early, went full mask off way too fucking early. But that's the ultimate goal, is to end the American experiment, to end liberal democracy in place of autocracy.
Of taking over the states and making sure that the Democrats cannot control the House of Representatives, so they can't legislate about anything. You also get Citizens United that same year, which again was about the use of media in favor of the Republican Party, 2010. And then in 2013, you get the gutting of the Voting Rights Act in Shelby County versus Holder. And there you're starting to see the dramatic skewing of the political system in favor of the Republican Party. That, of course, hurts the Democrats, but it also badly hurts the Republicans, because in those gerrymandered districts where a lot of people cannot vote unless they are Republicans, what Republicans become afraid of is not losing a general election, but rather being primary to the right. And that's when you start to see that Republican right really turn hard right. So from that, of course, you get the rise of the MAGA movement, in which Trump is pretty clearly adhering to the rhetoric of, women and minorities shouldn't have rights, but also quite visibly demonstrating his dominance of them through mocking the disabled reporter, through his words about sexual assault on women, through his very thinly veiled promises to appoint only the best people. Well, you know who the best people were.
Right.
So, was his election inevitable because Barack Obama was elected, suggests that there is simply a racist backlash against Obama's election. But I actually think it's less that than the fact that Obama's election indicated to Republican leaders and to their followers, who had been raised at that point on at least 20 years of a red meat right-wing media diet, that they must find a way to keep Democrats out of power. And they skewed the system very badly, sending it further to the right. At the same time that in order to keep people behind them, they really doubled down on the racism and sexism. And that then gave us Trump 2016. And just as a reminder, in 2016, Trump was the most economically moderate Republican running. I mean, that all got jettisoned very quickly, but people tend to forget that now. He really was the logical outcome of those 40 years of Republican rhetoric, the skewing of the mechanics of the system. And then in August 2017, with the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, he tossed over the traditional Republicans or the movement conservatives in the Republican Party and started to create an authoritarian movement. So,
the authoritarian movement, I 100% agree with that. Started at Charlottesville. That's where it started. That's where he looked at those neo-Nazis and he called them very fine people. And the right wing has twisted that. Oh, he meant both sides. We now know he did not mean both sides. Because that other side was Antifa. And we knew that then. They knew that then. The anti-fascists, the people that stand face to face with the Nazis and punch them back. Because it's not like they're just punching Nazis for no reason. No, the Nazis go around and they beat up black people. They beat up gay people. They beat up women who they call race traitors. They beat up Jewish people, sometimes killing them. It was Antifa that stood against that. And now Antifa is to be made a terrorist designation. To be anti-fascist is to be illegal in America. And just think about that. And all their crocodile tears over the word fascist. You're making anti-fascist illegal, and you're crying about being called fascist. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's very helpful, I think, to understand that the history here. I mean, obviously, it's always helpful to understand history, but there is. I think we are sort of past this now. But so much in like the 2017 to 20 until basically January 5th, 2021, there was still this idea among a lot of people that Trump was this anomaly, that he was just like this guy who hijacked the party briefly, and then he was going to be here for a little bit, and we could survive him. He would go away, and we would get back to the Romneys and the McCains and the Bushes after that, as opposed to seeing Trump as sort of the end result of a long process within the Republican Party. So I think that's just a very helpful thing for us to say. I'm not sure people are still, now they see the Republican Party is entirely in his thrall, although I do still think there are some Democrats on Capitol Hill who just think if we can just survive this next 4 years, all my Republican friends in the Senate will come back. I think that's a deeply naive view. I think there may be fewer of them every day, but it continues. So I think it's very helpful.
So one of the things that really interested me about Trump when he rose in 2016 was, and you got me talking about history, so this is all on you.
This is why I wanted you. Yes.
One of the things that I think is enormously slippery in American history, but in anybody who talks about this, is what populism is. Because some people like populism, some people hate populism, sometimes about economics, sometimes about race. It's really...
Yeah, we wasted 40 years arguing and debating with people that had no interest in arguing and debating. The only interest they had in arguing and debating was to distract from the ultimate goal.
Slippery. And one of the things that I really thought was interesting about Trump's rise is it occurred to me for the first time that, at least in the United States, which is all I'm qualified to speak about, Trump seemed to me not to be a politician, but to be a salesman, in that he was reflecting the American people at a certain moment, as if he was holding up a mirror to them, to a certain group of people who a lot of observers called populists. And it's the first time...
I don't think you can say Heather Cox Richardson isn't an expert. I don't know. Maybe you can. We live in post-truth era. What's up, Server 6?
It ever occurred to me that maybe, and this is how I now think of it, populism is less about a movement and less about principles than it is about the moment when a group of people recognizes that they have been lied to. So on the one hand, Trump really echoed the rhetoric that they've been hearing for a long time. And at the same time, he said, but it didn't work for you, so I'm going to make your economic situation better. So it felt kind of to me like the moment when the tide was shifting, that rather than populism being some movement that we could fit into conservatism or whatever, that it was more a moment in a population when the rhetoric no longer matched the reality and people were mad. What they were going to do about it was unclear. But that's why I thought he was interesting in 2016. And of course, now that ship has completely sailed.
Yep.
Podsy America is brought to you by Cook Unity. Talk about a go-to meal that keeps you
and 365-day returns.
The past and the present is the use of federal troops against American citizens. And the whole concept of the Posse Comitatus Act that you're reading about in all kinds of places is an important reflection of that attempt to consolidate power among a really small group of Americans who are running the government. So a lot of people get the Posse Comitatus story a little bit wrong. And that's that the reason we get the Posse Comitatus Act is actually a deeply political story. So what happens is in 1876, there is, if you will, a hung election. It's not clear who has won the presidential election of that year. It comes down to the Republican Rutherford B. Hayes, who appears to have lost the popular vote, to the Democrat Samuel Tilden, a reformer from New York. And in the attempt to figure out who had actually won the 4 states that were in question, one's in the West, we all forget about that, but there are 3 states in the American South. It's not at all clear whether the Democrats won those states or the Republicans won those states, because the elections are a mess. And in the 3 southern states, the states send back competing slates of electors. What happens then is that a number of people working for Rutherford B. Hayes go to those southern states and say to the people running the states, listen, if you will just back off and let Rutherford B. Hayes become president, we will make sure that you get stuff like a cabinet appointment for patronage positions and money for railroads. And the reason that that's important is because the guy who makes the most promises and is one of the most effective in getting the Southern leaders to drop their support for Tilden is a guy named Thomas A. Scott, and he is one of the major.
It's kind of broad brushing it. She's written several books. She got famous for Facebook posts that started on Facebook, and then she's like the top. What is it, subreddit in the world, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I like her. You don't have to like her Cerberus sex. I imagine you wouldn't.
Railroad leaders in the country. So it looks over the winter of 1877 as if the United States is going to go back into a civil war. In fact, the southern states throw their support to Hayes, and Hayes is inaugurated in March of 1877. That date's important because in July of 1877, America has its first national strike, and it's a strike on the railroads that starts in Tom Scott's biggest railroad. When that happens, Rutherford B. Hayes puts down the strike by calling out the Army. So if you are a Democrat who has just watched the Republicans essentially steal an election, and then you're watching the president call out the Army to support the positions of his biggest supporter against his workers, you feel like you have watched the destruction of American democracy truly once and for all with the help of the Army. So in 1878, when the Democrats take control of Congress, they push through the Posse Comitatus Act, which says that the federal army cannot be used against citizens for domestic law enforcement. And that concept that the military...
And that's probably why Gavin Newsom won the lawsuit in California. Clearly just no regard for the law. No regard for American citizens. It's phenomenal. Like any American in the America I grew up would put up with this, but I rejected lost cause narrative, right? Like I rejected that shit at a pretty young age, and I started my track to the left. You know, I rejected bigotry at a fairly young age, and I started my track to the left. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised, especially considering just all the different people I've talked to, especially considering all the different hateful people I've talked to. It really shouldn't surprise me, but it does. It's like I literally grew up in the world of like Indiana Jones and Red Dawn, right? Like, you know, punching Nazis and shooting commies and, you know, like Wolverines. You know, I always loved Red Dawn because they shouted Wolverines, and I don't even know if it was based in Michigan. I don't think it was, but I always loved it because of the Wolverines thing. You know, like it's to go from that childhood to this America. Like somebody should write the novel of that. Like I'm not good enough. Somebody that can actually publish it and write it well should write the novel of that.
It can't be used against American citizens, holds for every group of the U.S. military except the military under the Department of Homeland Security, which is a brand new, under George W. Bush, Department of the government. And because within it is the U.S. Coast Guard, and the Coasties, in fact, are charged with protecting domestic law enforcement. So that watching troops back in the streets in apparent violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, as a judge in California has said, really conjures up that moment again during Reconstruction when the president was using the military power of the United States against the American people to concentrate power among himself and his cronies. And I think that aspect of the Posse Comitatus Act is important enough that it shouldn't keep getting blown over as they're not supposed to do this. The reason they're not supposed to do this is if you put the disposal of the military into the hands of a president who uses it to protect his cronies, you've lost our democracy.
So much of your writing, the book you wrote, is about democracy, the struggle for democracy, the struggle to have our democracy represent the ideals we want it to represent. You know, as we sit here today, we have troops in the American streets. We have massed ICE agents disappearing people to torture prisons. You have the President of the United States on the official White House Twitter account declaring that he wants to revoke the citizenship of an American citizen like Rosie O'Donnell. You have the president totally ignoring, with essentially with the assent of Republicans in Congress, any sort of spending passed by Congress, just doing sort of closing agencies as he wants. He decided to rename the Department of Defense, even though that was named by statute the other day. It kind of feels like democracy is losing right now. And what I think is so alarming to so many people about it, particularly to me, is that it feels like so many people are okay with that. Right. You know, you have a plurality of the country who is with Trump throughout all of this. Right. You have, you know, just.
I wanted to watch all of it, but we're pretty much through most of it. And I've been streaming for a while. It is just about dinner time, and NFL is on, so I got to check the games. So, yeah, like, you know, this conservative movement, they're not conservatives on any, like, political philosophy level. Like, if you're going by political philosophy, most of the so-called liberals you'd find in the Democratic Party would fit the political philosophy of conservatism. These are movement conservatives. They adopted the name of a movement, and it's and created their own movement based on lost cause narrative, ancient grievance, and a desire to completely take away any ability to dismantle their freedoms as they see it again. This is 150 years of grievance at the very least, and 150 years of putting band-aids on those grievances to the point to where they're boiling over now. And we're at a place where the president seems hell-bent on starting some kind of civil war. The Republican Party seems hell-bent on starting some kind of civil war. Hell-bent on abusing what they see as the other, our transgender brothers and sisters, directly. And then after that, it's going to be all of the LGBTQ plus movement. They're going to start on that like immediately as well. But then it's going to be women, and then it's going to be, you know, biracial marriage and a woman's right to divorce. And it's going to be, you know, once we come back to that most ancient of grievances, well, a lot of us won't be around at that point. But they'll be addressing that most ancient of grievances too. Because a lot of these people, they don't see America's sin as a sin. The sin was ending the sin, if you take my meaning. So yeah, I'm going to go check out some football scores while I still can. Who knows, before the Gestapo starts coming for us. Will I survive to see the resistance? I don't know. But we must resist. It's the American way. But I don't know. We'll see what happens, man. I don't know if I'll stream tomorrow. Like, I wasn't supposed to be doing this every day. But maybe we'll start looking at Epstein files tomorrow. Maybe the next day. I work quite a bit. But yeah, I couldn't have this one guy calling me a coward. talk with Maya. I've talked with Maya before. We usually get along. I haven't talked to her in a while. I like Maya. She's always welcome on my streams. But, you know, when I do have an open room, I'm not interested in talking to, like, fake-ass people. I'm not going to have liars. If you're going to come in and lie, if you're going to gaslight, distort history, distort facts, I call it a bubble. I'll live in that bubble. I'll live in a bubble based on reality as opposed to gaslight. I have no interest in conversating with people that want to see me locked up for my political beliefs. You know, I'm a pacifist by nature. They want to say the left is right, or the left is violence. I haven't committed violence on anybody, any human being, in 20 years, 30 years. I don't even know how long it's been now. Like at some point in my 20s, I realized, like, all this fighting, all it does is hurt me, even if I win the fight. That violence is never the solution to anything. You know, it's been one of my creeds. You know, be a gentle giant. You know, and I try to be a gentle giant. I try not to be, you know, I understand I'm a very big person. I've got these, like, eyebrows. It's only gotten worse as my hairline's receded. You know, that I can just be thinking about something and people think I'm mad. You know, like, I'm very conscious of, like, intimidating people. I have a loud voice. You know, I'm a pacifist at heart. But pacifism only goes so far, right? Like, you're only going to be backed into a corner so far before you have to start fighting. And that's why it's so dangerous what the president of the United States is doing. If you want to not have political violence in the country, you've got to stop riling up your people to commit political violence, or riling up the people that's against you to commit political violence, right? Like, you're the goddamn president of the United States. Start acting like it. But he doesn't want to be president of the United States. He wants to be president of the Donald Trump states. And that should be an impeachable offense. And all you Christians out there, like, there's reporting coming out that he's making his people wear this golden lapel thing on their collars. That's like his face. How are you not outraged by the new golden calf? How do you follow this false prophet who's leading you to a hell I don't believe in? But if your hell exists, he's leading you there. None of us understand it. The only reason it's happening is because your religion has been corrupted by bad faith political actors who has used your religion as a weapon against you to fit their fascist agenda. You're a victim of your belief and you don't even know it. And while that's on you, unfortunately, it's us that are going to pay the price for it. So we live in this post-truth era now. I really need to, I think I'm going to change the screen here, because the earth is flat. We need to show the true flat earth, because we live in the fucking twilight zone. We live in Donald Trump's America. Y'all have a good day.